You're now listening to the Adiel Gorel Show. Each episode, I'll bring you the latest news from my discussions with top health and wellness experts so that you can bring yourself into better health. Today, on the Adiel Gorel Show. What do you think?
Yeah, I agree. And you don't have to lose the money. I mean, a lot of times what I see is when people retire or they sell their company, or I work with professional athletes, when they retire, their entire sense of identity and worth was based on this, right? And when that's gone, it's who am I? Everything that I thought I was, I am no longer.
Hi, everyone. It's a joy to be here today. It's great to be with you again. Today, I'm super excited because we get to talk to Dr. Elizabeth Lombardo, and I'm sure you will have a lot of stuff for us that we can use in our daily lives. Welcome, Elizabeth.
Thank you so much. It's an honor to be here.
Well, I mean, you do wonderful work. You're very well known in your field, and I'm very sure that all of our viewers and listeners can benefit. But if you can go back just a little bit, if you can tell us a little bit about your own journey, what's your story, how you got to where you are, and it'll take us from there.
Sure. Yeah. Thanks for asking. So I started my career as a physical therapist. After college, I went and got a degree in physical therapy and was a practicing PT, and I loved it. I loved being a PT. I loved when my clients came, post-surgery, after a stroke or spinal cord injury, and helping them be able to move again, get out of pain and function. And I thought I was going to do it forever. And then my life changed with a one-legged man. So by that, I mean a gentleman who had had a surgical amputation because of diabetes, not an uncommon situation, right, in terms of physical therapy. He was brought down to the gym, and it was my job to teach him how to walk again, right, how to use his prosthetic device, how to function independently. And we'll call him David. David wanted nothing to do with me. And in fact, he yelled at me and requested, we'll put it that way, that he go back to his room. So I had him go back to his room. Later, we were doing rounds with the doctors and the nurses, right? We're all talking about each patient. How can we best serve them? And everyone agreed that David was struggling. Made sense. But what happened next was what changed my life forever, because the attending physician, right, the surgeon who had cut David's leg off the day before said, I'll prescribe him Prozac. Now, there's definitely a time and place for medication, without a doubt, but it just struck me that maybe what David really needed was someone to talk to, right? Someone to help him get through this challenge. And it was really almost like the heavens opened up and was like, Elizabeth, this is actually your calling. Because obviously, we don't all deal with surgical amputations, right? But we all deal with loss. We all deal with disappointment. We all deal with hoping or expecting our life to go one way, and it doesn't necessarily go that way. And I really wanted to go back to school to learn how to help people deal with what life throws at them. So I went back and went back to psychology school. First week in psychology school, I'm madly taking notes, and something else hits me, and that is, why do I have to get a PhD to learn this? Right? Wouldn't we all benefit from understanding kind of basic concepts of our minds and how to make our mind work for instead of against us? And, that's one of the great things about your podcast and how you're getting all these people to really share this information without people needing to go back to school to get this information. So it really became my mission to help people, I say, before they need the proverbial shrink couch, right? Before they get into that really challenging place, to learn specific skills. And a lot of these are just skills that when we learn them, we can be more resilient. We can have healthier self-confidence. We can have less stress and more happiness when we apply these skills on a regular basis. And that's really become my purpose in life.
So this is really fascinating because you go straight to where many people get stuck. We all get stuck. We all go to negative places. We'll talk about some of the names that you call those places in a second. But I mean, clearly you are very passionate. I can see that and I love it. And you want to help people live a life of purpose, fulfillment, and true success. And true success is actually a trademark, which means it means something special to you. Can you explain?
Yeah. So I've worked with clients, I used to say for over 2 decades, but we're going on 2.5 decades now. So I work with clients for a really long time. And there's a pattern for me when my clients come in to work with me, with my coaching clients. They tend to be very successful on paper, right? They've made the money, they have the houses, they have, the 2.3 kids, whatever it is. And they come to me saying, is this as good as it gets? Is this as good as it gets? And why is that? Because all this external stuff, there's nothing wrong with wealth, there's nothing wrong with toys, all of that. There's nothing wrong with that. But it doesn't really bring that fulfillment that so many people think that it will. And so I created this concept of true success, which includes three ingredients, three variables: passion, purpose, and people. So passion is positive energy, right? Even during challenging times. Purpose is having meaning and fulfillment in our lives. And then the people component, we're social beings, right? And so how can we optimize our relationships, whether it's in the work realm or in our personal lives? How can we optimize those relationships? And when we have those three ingredients in our lives, that really is true success.
So when I got that loan for my business that was called a PPP loan, it had a completely different meaning, I guess.
That's right. It's a whole different set of P's.
Whole different set of P's. Well, it's very good. By the way, when you told me your story about the man with the missing leg, I remembered something. I used to volunteer on a farm when I was young, and there was a very, very unfortunate happening. Somebody lost his entire arm, and it was a young man, maybe 22. And what they did, not only did they get him a person to talk to, but they got him an older person to talk to who had lost his arm as well and lived life like that. So that really resonated when you said that.
Yes.
Yeah. So, I mean, when you talk about the people who come to you might have already made their money, might have already made they have 2.3 kids, whatever. We know from looking outside, that's not going to quite cut it, because there seems to be a hole that's, that you can't really fill that hole. If there's some injury or scar, you're trying to compensate. So we actually see people who are worth $100 billion. Most people would agree quite enough to buy, groceries, whatever you need to buy, in fact. But they strive very hard to be worth 200 billion, and in fact, to be worth more than that guy who's already worth 200 billion. So clearly, we know that's a race that's never gonna end. So just fulfilling a hole is not gonna work. So what you're talking about is coming at it from a totally different place, right?
Yeah, because so many people, I call that conditional self-worth. So our self-worth, how we view ourselves, how worthy we are, impacts every single interaction that we have with someone. And when I talk about self-worth, a lot of times people talk about high self-worth versus low self-worth. But I think it's actually what's most important is not the quantity, but the quality. And by that, I mean looking at what I call conditional self-worth versus unconditional self-worth. So conditional self-worth is I believe in myself if and only if certain external conditions are met. Right? And those external conditions vary from person to person. So it may be the next million or $100 million. It may be if I look a certain way, if people compliment me, if I have a certain job title. But so many people in our society have this conditional self-worth. And so they're constantly scanning the environment to determine how worthy they feel about themselves. And like being on a treadmill, once they achieve it, instead of thinking, now everything's great, that leg goes back and they have to keep finding more external variables to help them feel good about themselves. So when I'm working with clients, one of the things we really work on is this concept of unconditional self-worth. Unconditional self-worth means you believe in yourself regardless, right? Not in a narcissistic way. Narcissism is actually very conditional, right? Because the narcissist likes to be better than other people. But unconditional self-worth is really, it's based on our values and our core purpose, what's most important to us. And when my clients can cultivate that unconditional self-worth, that's when that sense of peace, that sense of fulfillment, that sense of connection with others really starts to flourish.
Yeah, of course. I mean, we can even take one of those examples. Let's go back to the example that I just made up of the person who is worth $100 billion. And something happened, the company goes bankrupt. All of a sudden, in one day, many lawsuits, everything, the guy is worth zero. Now what?
Yeah.
So now, is he not? So, I hear about many couples who says, well, when we went bankrupt, that's when we got divorced. I believe it might have been not so much that now there is less money or no money, it's the self-esteem is shot, and now the relationship is not the same.
Yeah.
What do you think?
Yeah, I agree. And you don't have to lose the money. I mean, a lot of times what I see is when people retire or they sell their company, or I work with professional athletes, when they retire, their entire sense of identity and worth was based on this, right? And when that's gone, it's who am I? Everything that I thought I am no longer. And that stress, when we have stress inside of us, it can be very infectious. And so oftentimes when, for example, people come in, going back to kind of a relationship problem, when someone comes into me and says, I'm getting a divorce from my partner, first thing I say is, how stressed out are you? Because, and we'll talk, I'm sure, more about this, but when we're really stressed out, we think in more negative ways. We tend to put the blame on other people. I'm unhappy because of him, or I'm unhappy because of her. And so what I try to do is help people get into a better headspace, help them be happier themselves. And then if they make the decision, what, this marriage or this relationship isn't working for me, that's great. But if we make that decision when we're in a high level of stress, it's not always helpful for us.
Yeah, and I believe you work with Jack, or at least I read that. So
Shaquille O'Neal
here's an
says
example.
Dr. Lombardo is his head coach for happiness. Yes.
There you go. So that's a great. So I look at somebody like Shaq. I call him Shaq because that's what we all do, except for you. I look at him and I say he was an incredibly dominant basketball player. So you could easily say, well, upon retirement, things could have gone in many ways which are not so good. Although with him, I believe you could see even during his career, he went to the movies, he went to music, he was already putting out the feelers. Also, he's blessed with a certain fun, childlike, gregarious personality. So he actually is a very good example of somebody, I'm sure with your help as well, who transitioned into actually a better second portion of life than the one before.
Yeah, I mean, really pursuing, and I think this is helpful for us all, even if we aren't, the Shaq level, but, looking at what excites you, what interests you. I mean, he went and, became deputized and was working in law enforcement for a bit because that's what he was passionate about. So for all of us out there, we don't need to have the millions and millions, but what gets you excited? What are you passionate about? When we talk about purpose, it's about contribution, experiences, and growth. So contributions, contributing to a cause that is greater than yourself, that you are excited about. Growth, how are you growing, right? We've all heard the saying, if you aren't growing, you're dying. So how are you growing? And then experiences, how are you spending your time? Is someone watching 8 hours of Netflix, or are they having a meaningful conversation? Nothing wrong with Netflix, but maybe a little less Netflix and a little more connection would help bring more purpose in our lives.
Talking about Netflix, so that's another thing where you talk about passion and purpose, direction and contribution, and it all feels really good. In fact, I can say from my own experience, I own and run a real estate investment company. I've helped thousands of people retire. I have a PBS show about it. That's my business. What am I doing here with you? Hobby. It's a hobby. I'm interested in what you have to say. I like to hear what your message is, simplified for our viewers. What do I get out of it? It's fun. Yeah. It's a hobby. So I mean so I can understand that. But I mean, you have, well, let's look at it like this. You help people crush their inner critic. So I mean, I know I have an inner critic. I think most humans do. Can you speak a little bit about that?
Yeah, so we all have this little voice inside of us that sometimes says some not very nice things, right? I can't believe you just did that. You're in way over your head. Who do you think you are? And interestingly, that inner critic tends to get louder the more stressed we are. The question is, how much do we listen to that inner critic? And so many people don't realize it's just a voice in their heads as opposed to this is the truth. One of the things when I'm working with my coaching clients is to help them overcome their inner critic is, one, to identify their inner critic. And call it an inner critic, right? So I actually have named my inner critic. Her name is Mitzi. And what that does is it
Okay.
helps us depersonalize instead of getting sucked into those thoughts, which then cause us to feel worse, which cause more negative thoughts, which cause more negative emotions, and it becomes this downward spiral. When we can take a step back and get some space from it by whether calling it an inner critic, calling it our mother-in-law, calling it Mitzi, whatever you want to call it, that gives us some space. But the other thing the way that I view this and my personal perspective is I believe that our inner critic, while not very kind, actually has positive intentions. So I like to explain the different or kind of contrast the drill sergeant versus the cheerleader. So drill sergeant, I had an incredible opportunity to work at West Point Military Academy when I was a physical therapist, and those cadets got yelled at, and the drill sergeants would yell and put these soldiers down. Why? The ultimate goal was they wanted these soldiers to be successful, right? That's the ultimate goal. That is why a drill sergeant interacts with the soldiers that way, with the ultimate goal that the soldiers are successful in the battlefield. Cheerleader. What does a cheerleader do? Woo, doing great, right? Really positive, rewarding for the ultimate goal that the person does better. So if we can hear our inner critic, and I say play the game of life, if it were true that your inner critic had a positive motivation, what might it be? So you walk by the mirror, someone walks by the mirror and they're beating themselves up about how they look. Maybe what your inner critic really wants is for you to be healthy, right? Or you're preparing for a speech and your inner critic is taking over. You're going to mess up. It's going to be awful and unbearable. What your inner critic really wants is for you to be successful. And so if we can depersonalize the inner critic and listen to what its positive motivation might be, then we can take that and move on.
Well, I decided not to adopt the name Mitzi for my critic. I'll adopt a different name. But if we look at Mitzi for a second, let's say Elizabeth, that you decide to go and get another degree at school. You just want to get another PhD for some reason, and here you are. You took an exam, and you got 94 out of 100. Now, is Mitzi going to say, Elizabeth, 94? That must have been the best in class. Or is Mitzi going to say, what happened to the other six?
Right. Yeah. And that's the interesting thing because our inner critic, it differs according to how stressed out we are. Right? If we're in a really good place, if we're feeling confident, if life is going well, and we're in what I would call the green zone, kind of a happier place, then we might say, hey, 94, awesome. If we're in someone's really stressed out, or I'll put it on me, if I'm really stressed out, for me, and one of my books was on perfectionism, and you probably know this, but self-help authors write books for themselves, and then we want to help others. So I was what I would call a recovering perfectionist. But when I get into those high levels of stress, that perfectionism kicks in more. And so I'm more likely to say, oh, what's wrong with you, Elizabeth? What happened to the other 6 points?
Okay, but there is a phenomenon that we are starting to see in Gen Z kids, and that's the culture that they grew up getting a participation trophy.
Or as I say, a trophy
is
for breathing. Yes.
a trophy for breathing. So, this is really complex because when we talked before about the, unconditional success, the unconditional, you are worthy not because you are worth so many millions. You are worthy not because of your looks. You're worthy because you're a human being on this planet. So, in a way, you deserve a participation trophy. But I think the culture took it to an extent that now we have kids who are very entitled. There was a case just recently at a pre-med course on organic chemistry. The professor is the guy who wrote the textbook and has been teaching this course for 35 years. And the students said the course is too hard. It's going to screw up our GPAs. And they petitioned the university, and the university fired him.
Is that the at NYU?
So,
yeah.
I don't remember the name of the
NYU,
school,
yeah.
but that's taking it to the entitled place that a child comes from getting a trophy for everything they do. In that case, maybe a little bit of an inner critic would be positive. wouldn't it?
Well, here's the thing. I actually wrote a book. It's called From Entitlement to Intention, Raising
Oh,
Purpose-Driven Children. And the people who are entitled have a huge inner critic. That's why they're acting entitled. And it's all based on conditional self-worth. I am worthy if and only if I get all A's, if and only if people tell me how great I am, if and only if I get 100 likes on social media. When that doesn't happen, then I feel bad about myself. And what do I do when I feel badly about myself? I'm going to attack you. It's your fault. So I should get an A and I didn't. And so it must be your fault. And so I'm going to petition to get that A.
okay. So when you work with
Mm-hmm.
people, and let's say you see a person sitting there with you, and they absolutely must have everything needs to be an A plus
Yes.
even to feel worthy.
Yes.
So, I mean, do you sometimes go and see where it started? Like maybe they were a little kid, they got all the love of their parents, and then the little brother was born, and they took away all the love, and they said, "I'm going to win it back by being all A's." I mean, do you go there, or is it not really that necessary?
Well, that's a great question. I tend to practice something called cognitive behavioral therapy, which is very skills based, what's happening here and now and in the future. Having said that, the way that we interact with people is caused by what we say to ourselves. And what we say to ourselves is caused by not just what's happening now, but our entire experience in life. So sometimes finding those root causes. In my book, Better Than Perfect, I had 7 steps. It was called, the steps were the acronym PERFECT. And the first one was a post-mortem, to do a post-mortem of your past, to really look at what were some of those causing factors. So sometimes that can be helpful. What a lot of times people don't realize is that they have these beliefs that are so deep-seated in their, in their psyche, really in their bodies, that sometimes just being aware of it and asking questions, how helpful is that? How useful is that? What are the benefits of that thought? What are maybe some not so benefits of that thought? And kind of starting to play with realizing this is just a thought that you have in your head. It's not a fact.
So you put 3 very good P's before. P as in Peter. Passion, purpose, people. Now I'm going to put 2 P's that we covered, but they may not be quite as nice. Like procrastination and perfectionism.
Yeah.
I believe, and I want to hear what you think about it, they go hand in hand. Because if I'm starting on a task and I'm a perfectionist, the magnitude of what I'm faced with to make it perfect may give me pause and say, you know what? Let me finish the series on Netflix first.
Exactly.
So don't these two fit into each other a little
They
bit?
definitely can, for sure, because that perfectionist it has to be perfect. And the thing about perfectionists, if I just take a sidestep on this P, perfectionists think in an all or nothing way. Something's perfect or it's a failure, right? But they take
Right.
it one step further. If it's a failure, then I'm a failure. And so
Right.
telling a perfectionist something doesn't have to be perfect, often they'll say, I know. But deep down inside, they feel like, yes, it does, because again, it goes to their self-worth. So yes, a lot of times perfectionists will procrastinate because it's so stressful to tackle it, or it's not perfect yet. So I'm not going to put my website out. I'm not going to talk to someone about maybe doing coaching with them. I'm not going to go up to that person who I'm interested in because I'm not sure exactly what the perfect thing is to say. And so I'm going to avoid confronting that.
So you have many types of people walking out there. Let's look at 2 types. One are the relentless, perfectionists who feel like I'm not going to put out my website until it's perfect, and it could be years into the future.
Yes.
The other type is the opposite. I got trophies, I'm good, I'm great, I'm going to put a website, the crappiest website ever. So the results in the world is crappy websites are being put up, and all the amazing websites are being held back by people who watch Netflix until it gets perfect.
Yes, and when that crappy website goes out, the goal then is to say, okay, it's up. Now, what can we learn from it? Wow, we're getting no traffic. Great, we need to make some changes. Actually, that color scheme is horrendous. Great, let's make some changes. So sometimes putting ourselves out there, we don't want to necessarily do it haphazardly. We want to put out what we can, but if we wait for 100%, it's never going to go out there. And I have a saying, it's not failure, it's data. Right? It's information. So if you put that website out and it is kind of crap, get some information, learn, grow, make the changes that are necessary so that you can make it even better.
Not that I'm making any statement about whether they're good or bad, but when Facebook, as it used to be called, was formed, the head of the company, the young guy who started it, said, our motto is move fast and break things. Mm-hmm. So that's, you put up the crappy website and then you make it better. But anyway, you talk about the red zone. I heard you make a reference to the green zone. You have a new book, which I just got, called Get Out of the Red Zone. Can you talk about that?
Yes. So and just a caveat, the red zone that I'm talking about is the psychological red zone, not the football red zone. So in football, you want to get into the red zone. In psychological red zone, we want to get out of. So
hold on. Sometimes a football team gets into the red zone and in their minds they're in the red zone all of a sudden. It could happen both ways.
Exactly, which is why I have a sports psychology practice. I also keep thinking, I don't know if you ever watch The Red Zone. It's a channel that puts me in the red zone watching that. So I think I'm going to do a video on why watching the red zone puts me in the red zone. But anyway, the psychological red zone is when we experience high levels of distress, right? Distress in psychology is really any emotion you don't want. So it could be anger, frustration, irritability, sadness, fear, worry, helplessness, hopelessness, worthlessness. All of that goes in the distress pile. And distress exists on a continuum, right? From 0, no distress at all, life is great, to 10 out of 10, the most stressed out you've ever been. So if someone's an anger 10 out of 10, they're probably yelling, throwing something, proverbial steam coming out of their ears. Most people, thankfully, don't live at 10, and most people don't live at 0. Usually we're somewhere in between. And so just kind of thinking in the past, say, week, what has been your average level of distress? And realizing we have an average, but we also have that day-to-day, certain things put us higher stress versus others. And that red zone happens when we're at a 7 out of 10 or higher. So a 7, 8, a 9, or a 10, that's the psychological red zone. And in the red zone, we don't always think or act rationally. We're actually using a different part of our brain to process information. And I can tell you, a lot of people right now are living in the red zone and sometimes not even aware of it.
Stay tuned for part 2 of this interview. Thank you for joining us today. I know you love what's coming next in part 2. Be sure to click the subscribe button for more videos.